Good morning, my name's Bill and I'm an alcoholic. And today's show is called You'd Never Know. When walking down any high street in the world, I think you'd be hard pressed to find an alcoholic or an addict. An alcoholic who's quietly shopping with everyone else, who mingles in with the crowd, who doesn't stand out. Maybe they're shopping with their family or their partner. Maybe they're on their own, they're smartly dressed. Maybe they've bought a few bags of shopping. Because unfortunately, addiction is not always an outward-looking disease. Where I suppose the normal stereotypical idea of alcoholism is of degeneration, is of hopelessness. It's of dirty matted hair, of people begging on the streets. Maybe they're sat on a sleeping bag with a dog and they've got a little cap full of coins. It's of sorrowful eyes, of being surrounded by empty bottles and cans. But that's what we see. But the reality is often different, and the reality is often unrecognisable. Where what the average person sees in another doesn't always tell the truth of what's going on inside. Alcoholism is actually a disease of unremitting pain, of anxiety and loss. It's a disease of degradation and the loss of any happiness. It's a disease of wanting to kill yourself. It's a disease of low self-worth, of self-hatred. It's a disease of resentment and mind-bogglingly terrible fear. But these don't show themselves outwardly. Where the alcoholic becomes adept at covering up the consequences of their actions, they become adept at covering up how they feel inside. The more apparent my drinking became, the more I moved away from the mutterings. I shielded myself from the unwanted whispers and the desperate words of concern. On the surface, I was what we called a functioning alcoholic. Where I worked, I paid my taxes, I didn't lose my driving licence, I'd never been in prison, I was married, and we raised a family. We had 5 children. All my children had hobbies. The girls did horse riding and the boys did banger racing and football. It was all very normal. And I'd go to sports days, and I'd join in with them, and I'd work hard. And that's the problem with alcoholism. You would probably never know I had a problem. Some people did, of course they did, but most didn't. And I lived in a little village, and I was probably quite well known in the village, as we all were. But nobody ever really knew. Maybe they thought, Bill, do you know what, occasionally you go over the top, or Bill drinks a little bit too much, but he's all good fun, and, you know, he's nice to be around, and we have lots of jokes and laughs. But that's why my drinking took me to a place where I could have actually died. And at some times in my life I did want to die. I couldn't see a way out. But the more people commented upon my drinking, the more people focused on what was going wrong in my life, the more I withdrew from society, from the village, from our social circle of friends, from life itself. We say in our big book we seek out sordid places, and whilst I don't know about the word sordid, I certainly did seek out some loneliness where I could just drink at my own speed by myself. Because drinking, alcoholism, call it what you want, is not actually about homelessness. It's not just about that. Drinking is not just about food banks or divorce or losing a job or getting into trouble with the police. Because it's not always about what you see. And my alcoholism, and many, many other people's alcoholism, was more about what you don't see. It was not about the recognisable, the outward signs, but it was absolutely about the unrecognisable. And that's why drinking too much, as I did for 25 years, is so successful in creating long-lasting loss. And that long-lasting loss wasn't my family. It wasn't my marriage, it wasn't my children. It was the loss of a life, of my past, of what should have been, of a timeline, of happy memories, of what could or might have been under different circumstances, the loss of friends, the loss of opportunities, the loss of something that was probably the most important thing in my life, and that was the loss of myself. But unfortunately, nothing is more important to the alcoholic than defending their supply. It becomes paramount. And it becomes more important than anything else in the end, unfortunately. We don't like to admit it at the time, but looking back, that was the case. Where pushing away unwanted attention becomes an art form, and I became very good at it. I would break off contact, I wouldn't speak to people, I wouldn't go where people would criticise me. Because alcoholism lives next door to the great and the good in this world, and it also lives next door to grinding poverty, where neither the great and the good or the grinding poverty will ever bring about a victorious and harmonious amount of help to the alcoholic. Being loved, being wanted, and being needed, unfortunately, are no barriers to drinking like I did, and there's certainly no barriers to wanting to die. Because however much people wanted you or needed you or loved you, it never was enough. And very often, I used to think they're only saying it, they don't mean it really. Alcoholism is a disease of wanting someone to understand more than anything in the world. It's a disease of fearing the truth. And it's a disease of wanting what isn't available. And I wanted people to understand, but of course they didn't understand because they're not alcoholics of our type. And yes, I did fear the truth, and the truth was I was going to die. And my life's chances, my family, my marriage, everything I'd worked for, the truth was I knew eventually it was all going to go down the pan. And being a disease of wanting what isn't available, what was available in my life was what I saw in others, how other people lived, but it wasn't available to me. Because the way I drank and what I did and what I said, I couldn't be a part of that world. It just wasn't acceptable. To be at one with this world and to be at one with myself was what I always wanted deep down inside, just to be a part of things. But unfortunately, alcoholism is a disease of wanting to drink as well as wanting to be happy. But my alcoholism assured me that I could only have one, but not the other. I could either be a drinker or I could either be happy. I couldn't have both. So eventually, I did give up drinking and I went to Alcoholics Anonymous. I gave up the former for the latter. And in Alcoholics Anonymous, a happiness slotted neatly into the void that my alcoholism had just left vacant. But unless you've been where an alcoholic's been, unless you've felt as an alcoholic has felt, I guess that you'd never know. So next time you're walking down the street, next time you're thinking about the addicts or the alcoholics on television, that alcoholic may be living next door to you. You may know them very well. Don't always go on what you see, because the most difficult part of my alcoholism was I knew that I was a good person, I worked hard, I did everything right. But it was almost more difficult for me to reach out for help, because there were no outward signs. And I felt embarrassed, I felt alone, and I felt restricted in my own little world in the end. And that's why this share is called You'd Probably Never Know. Bill the Shirt, Bristol.